what you believe is what you think God believes. And it's just utterly brilliant research. They manipulated your belief, and basically it was, if you changed your mind on a subject, lo and behold, God changed his mind as well.
Wow.
And it's just a fascinating study that shows that what we think God thinks or believes is a projection of our thoughts and beliefs.
That is a fun intro. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, that took me, I kid you not, that took me like 5.5 hours.
Oh, I was going to guess much more than that. Like, that's impressive work. Well done.
I think total, if I had to count like collecting all the clips and things like that, probably a lot more. But the actual putting everything together, very long time.
Yes,
very long
I
time.
believe that. Like, that was, I know what goes into that kind of thing. It's like, well done.
So you liked it? You felt honored by that? You feel like it's worth it?
Okay, dancing?
Cool.
I was up here dancing. Love it.
I wanted to make sure that you felt like we're going hard for Dr. Bird. Like we're throwing it down. I love it. I bet you've never had a theme song like that, huh?
Nice. Well, so I mean, full disclosure, David McDonald made me a personal theme song,
and his are good actually. His are top tier. So
I actually for one of our streams, I actually sent him this song, and I said, "You need to play this the next time I'm on your show." And he's like, "Oh yeah,
done." Yeah. Well, listen, if I got to be second to anybody, I'm glad it's David McDonald over at Deep Drinks. Everybody go check out after this, not during this.
Yeah.
David McDonald on Deep Drinks.
What's the longest you've gone without sleep? I love that you don't know.
I don't.
I respect that.
Listen,
you gotta think about that.
Listen, I have a past.
Yep, I can tell already.
Almost, I want to say almost 72 hours.
Ooh.
Could be 72, but I don't think so.
Sometimes it's just the way that they talk about the church up the street.
Literally.
Those guys and the way they're doing things, you don't want to be part of. And every other church except for ours is doing it wrong. And
yes.
Yeah,
I told Vince, you're almost better off being an atheist than being the wrong kind of evangelical Christian. You're almost more salvageable not believing in God at all than being a Presbyterian or a Methodist. Dr. Laden, thank you so much for joining me for Growing Up Fundy and for participating in Skeptic University. I'm really excited to talk to you today. We've spoken before on a Skeptic Haven, I always forget the term, fundraiser. Fundraiser. And I just thought you had some really interesting things to say about an experience you had living overseas. And I don't want to spoil it, so I'll let you kind of introduce what we're talking about today, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure. Yeah, I think we had been talking about my research with the FA. Pygmies in the Congo. So first, a little context. The people I work with are often called Pygmies, and we have a problem where a lot of people rejected that word because it's also a word we use in English as a derogatory term. We don't use it so much anymore, but the people would be called having a pygmy intellect, meaning that they're stupid, that kind of thing.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
well, we don't say those words anymore,
right?
But so people want to use a different word.
Okay.
And one of the people who worked with this group, in fact, I worked with, was suggested using the phrase short-statured forest forager. But then that's like, is that any less racist?
Right.
Or whatever. Right. So there's really no good word. The people specifically, there's a group of people that are short-statured forest foragers that live in Africa. They're all in Central Africa. They're not in West Africa.
Okay.
They're all in Central Africa, but they are also short. And they're not just short because they didn't eat a lot or something. There are populations like Europeans, immigrants to America in the 19th century were short. Their kids were taller. Their kids were taller. Their kids were taller. Until finally you have 6 feet people walking around, and all their great grandparents were 5.5 feet. Right?
Yeah.
The Pygmies have a genetic distinction in which a second growth hormone that kicks in during adolescence, typically in people, doesn't in them. So they have so their growth curve just stops.
Is that like earlier. Does that have to do with like inbreeding of any kind, or is that just?
It's just a genetic difference, and it's probably adaptive.
Got it.
But everyone disagrees as to why it's there. But the main reason probably is because there are a number of nutrients that are short in the forest. You can't get them as much, including just basic food.
Got it.
I mean, I'm 6'1", and I lived with them and ate the food they had, and I almost starved to death.
Wow.
It was only because I occasionally got out. So I would go to bed at night in my hut with a container with about 1.5 kilos worth of food. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and gorge on it and go back to sleep. That's how hungry I was.
Wow.
No, the food quality is so low and so infrequent that it's plenty of food for them. But if you're double their body mass like I am, it's not enough food. So I think I like the food theory.
Yeah, interesting.
Another theory is that the region does not have much iodine in it. So as a result, people who live there get goiter, and there's even a birth defect that has to do with iodine deficiency called cretinism, which happens to some people. But the people who have those problems are not the Pygmies. They're the other people that live there who are from outside, that's moved into the forest over recent centuries, and they're the ones that are affected by the lack of iodine in the diet. So
why do you
maybe
think it doesn't impact the Pygmies?
Because they're small and they get enough iodine.
Interesting.
Or maybe there's another reason. Maybe they have some other genetic difference that gives them, like, they're better at getting iodine. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to eat that we don't know about that has. We don't really know. That's a mystery. An awful lot is not known about these people.
Right.
An awful lot. And so anyway, there's several groups that live in the Central Africa, in the rainforest, including in Rwanda and in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in Cameroon. And these different groups are distinct from each other and separate and don't know about each other, but all share certain characteristics and also have some really important differences. And the group I worked with is called the EFE, E-F-E.
Oh,
which
interesting.
Which is also their local word for, it's a word for father, but it's not just any father. Their word for father is Afa, which is the same in Arabic and Hebrew and a bunch of other languages, because they are speaking the language that's connected to those languages. And their word for mother is the same, is Ima.
Yeah.
So it's a Central Sudanic language, but there's an Fa, I think, is a word that refers to kind of the father.
Interesting.
So it might be used in normal day-to-day speech, but it's rarely, very rarely so. But it kind of means like the father, forest father, God kind of guy is the Fa.
Now, is their language specific to them, but similar to others, or do they speak a language that other people speak as well?
Yeah, so the so-called villagers, which are the non-Pygmy people that live in the area, they are the Lesse people. They moved in, I believe they moved into the area in the 19th century when there was a lot of rebellion and warfare going on in the Sudan. So if you ever read the old colonial history, Gordon at Khartoum and the siege of Khartoum and the Mahadist rebels and all that stuff, when that was going on in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, I think a lot of people left Sudan and headed into the forest. And I think they may have pushed other people who pushed other people, but that's where they come from. So their language includes a whole rich vocabulary for raising cattle and goats. And their origin story involves a goat. Now, there are goats in the forest, but their end of time story involves a goat. But their language clearly is of people who lived among cattle and goats who don't have them now. They have goats, but they don't have cattle. So there are pastoral people from the savannah that moved into the forest many generations ago, and the Fa Pygmies adopted their language.
Interesting.
Okay. However, the Pygmy language, the Pygmy dialect, the dialect that they use, can be so different. It's like if you are you live in the South,
yeah,
and I can understand you, but there are people in the North and people in the South from certain places who cannot understand each other.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
So it's like that. It's like it's
like regional.
Yeah, it's like more extreme, than a person from Vermont and a person from the hinterland outside of Baton Rouge talking to each other.
Yeah.
They can get it, but it's going to take a few minutes of adjustment. So that's their language thing. But then there are words that are definitely just FA words, we think. That some of the words are just adopted by other people by them. And one of those words might be okapi, which is one of the few words in English which is spoken by these people who live there. It's an animal. You know, the okapi is like a giraffe thing. That's one of the few words that got out of, that's their word. Anyway.
Like they invented it and we took that word from them.
Right. Yeah, because then when the okapis were discovered, that's where they live. Discovered by the West. Anyway, so that's the context. And so you would ask me about like what stuff happens there that we can learn from, but people living in Western civilization can learn from them. And that's an interesting question because you would think anthropology would address that. Right. And in a sense, old-fashioned anthropology. I'm an anthropologist. Anthropology comes into different flavors. There's biological anthropology. That's what I do. And then there's archaeology. That's also what I do. Then there's linguistics, which is like, there are anthropology departments that don't include linguistics because it's so different. But I personally am very interested in linguistics and studied it.
Yeah, I feel like that would be important.
Oh, it's important, but when you get into specialization, you can't do everything right. And then the other kind of anthropology is what you might call sociocultural anthropology. And to tell you the truth, I have no truck with modern sociocultural anthropologists. I think what they're doing is mostly a waste of time. I can say that now. And their field got disrupted and corrupted by various things that happened in academia. And they're almost it's nothing interesting happening there at all, mostly. But
I won't tell them that you said that.
Don't tell anybody. Don't repeat this to anyone. In the United States, I think there are actually some cultural anthropologists working in other countries that are doing good work. But in the old days, a cultural anthropologist could be either the hobgoblin of colonialism, like let's go in and learn about these people so we can exploit them. But mostly anthropologists don't do that. Mostly the idea is you look at another culture to learn about humanity in general. And as a side effect, you learn about your own culture. Now, a classic example is probably Marcel Mauss's work with the gift. Like when you look at how when people give things to each other, so categorize all that as just gift giving. And you realize when you look at different cultures, you find elaborated versions of gift giving, which are extremely violent, controlling events in which one group of people takes over another group of people by just giving them a lot of stuff. It's like,
sounds like in-laws.
Right. Well, yeah, in-laws and gift giving. Yeah, that's a big deal. So let's say you have a roommate and Christmas comes along or something. Do you give your new roommate at college, do you give them a gift or not? What happens when they give you a gift? Like it creates this relationship.
Right.
Like it's a very powerful. So anyway, anthropologists notice almost. Yeah, it's like debt. So anthropologists notice that in other cultures and come back and go, oh yeah, actually we do that too. Right. I mean, we are indebting each other with gifts or creating relationships by the act. And so it's only by seeing other cultures actually almost using it as an act of violence, we realize it's not just a good, nice, fun thing you do with no relevance. Turns out maybe it's more interesting and more important than that.
Right.
And then you see other animals do gifting, right? Like nuptial gifts among flies. You know, I mean, there's all kinds, where a male gets a morsel of food and the female comes by and this is her main diet. Like she eats that's her food that gives her the ability to reproduce and they mate while she's eating it. That's a nuptial gift, right? Certain flies do that.
I didn't know that.
So anyway, gift giving is not just a useless ritual. It might be, but so what do these guys do? And I have to talk about guys because there's a great deal of serious angst about outsiders. And if you're an outsider male, you cannot hang around with the women. I mean, if there's a group of men, it's almost always men and women at all times. So you're always with both men and women. But you couldn't, like when the women go off and do something, a male anthropologist can't follow them.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
If you do, and I have done it, but with permission, if you do it, there's a couple guys come along with you.
Right.
Okay. But mostly the men study what men do and the women study what women do. So which works, right?
Yeah.
And but so most of what I know is studied about, so is relation to what men do, but they have an interesting ritual that's worth explaining.
Okay.
I think. They hunt. So when a man goes in hunting, he might go and climb in a tree and wait for an animal to come by and then he shoots it with an arrow. Okay. but he doesn't shoot it with his arrow because he doesn't have any of his arrows with him. Every arrow is given to him by another man, and he knows exactly who they got each one from. Okay, so he shoots the animal and wounds it. Now he's not far from camp, and the animal is only wounded, so he shouts out a yodeling signal. They have a yodeling language that tells people in camp that an animal's been hit, and somebody sends out a dog to help him. The dog is not the hunter's dog. And the dog runs down, and other guys go out there and they find the animal, they run it down, and someone else maybe kills the animal. Maybe the hunter kills it, maybe someone else kills it.
Right.
And then they bring it back to camp, but they stop outside of camp. They do not bring the animal to camp. You can't bring an animal into camp.
Oh, really?
Right. And then two people who are not the hunter, it can't be the hunter, 2 people butcher the animal outside of camp and divide it into ritually determined parts. Now, the parts are anatomically sensible, except a little bit. There's some stuff in there that doesn't make sense anatomically, really, as to how they take the animal apart. And then they divide the animal up. Now, a different kind of hunting, it's a group hunting where several men are involved, and one of the men decides to go hunting. I'm going to go hunting. Anybody want to go with me? And then they start to go hunting, and somebody does some magic to make the hunting more effective. Then when they're out hunting, somebody shoots an animal with an arrow that's not theirs. And then other people help run the animal down. The dogs they brought are usually not theirs. They get them from someone else. Like the person whose dog it is stays in camp sometimes. And they get the animal and they bring it back. They do not bring it into camp. And again, they butcher it. So depending on the kind of hunting, there's a list of people who were involved in getting this animal.
Why do you think that is?
Well, okay, we'll get to that. So everybody who's involved gets a specific piece. There's a primary piece, then there's 2 pieces that are less valuable, and there's 2 more pieces that are least valuable, usually. Okay. And if the head is separate, that's yet another category. So if you are the main person in the hunt, you get a certain piece. Okay. It happens to always be the same piece in all instances, which is where the backstrap is. Okay. And tenderloin in the back. Nice. Yeah. That's the best piece. And then the other pieces is pretty random as to what people say. The next person gets this one, the next person. So everybody gets a piece depending on their role. Now, if you ask people when it happens, they'll give you a very strict set of rules. And you say, is that the rule you always follow? Yes. The person whose arrow it is gets the left front arm, whatever. Then you go out some other day and you see it again. And you say, well, that was different. The person with the arrow got a different piece. Yeah, we do it this way too. But we only do it this way. So they'll both simultaneously say, this is exactly how we do it every time. And then they'll also say, but we do it a different way every time. Except for the backstrap always going to the main person. But who is the main person? Sometimes it's the guy who called the hunt. Sometimes it's the magic guy. Sometimes it's the person who hit the deer with their arrow. Okay. Okay. And of course, there's always 2 people butchering. Right. Then this looks like they're setting it up so that the best hunter, the most important person, gets the best piece. Now they wrap them in leaves, so you can't see what piece is which. We can kind of guess. They walk into camp. They do not speak of the hunt. No one speaks of the hunt. Any hunter-gatherer group. You just don't.
It's like Fight Club.
It's like Fight Club. No one speaks of it. But each man hands the meat that he's carrying to a woman. Now, if he's an unmarried man and his mother's there, maybe it's the mother that gets it. A married man hands it to his wife if she's there. Pretty standard, right? So you hand it to a woman or a person who's playing the role of a woman. There's been polio through the area. There's some men that are very badly crippled, and they more play the role of a woman in camp. So maybe that person will get it. But somebody gets it, and then that person takes it out, cuts it up in little pieces, and then it's distributed as needed to everybody in the camp. So even though all this ritual happened to make sure that this piece goes to this guy, everyone gets what they need.
Interesting.
Okay. Furthermore, this whole thing where they have all these rules, they break them all the time. Who actually walks in? There might be some guy who did nothing useful, and he gets the best piece.
Why?
He will be usually now I can't prove this, but I didn't see it happen enough, and I didn't collect enough data to prove this. But my hypothesis is that the two-layer hypothesis. The first layer, of course, is all ritualized to demonstrate who's a good hunter, so that the women are impressed.
Right.
That's a naive anthropological explanation. People collect the data on that. They studied it. It doesn't work. There's no relation. It doesn't work at all. It's not. They're not getting mates or sex because they're good at hunting. They're just not.
Right.
Okay. So that was a great hypothesis that happened, and it never broke. The data killed that. All the ugly data killed the beautiful hypothesis right there. The next idea is they are giving some guy a break.
Okay.
So the young unmarried man, and there's a woman who's not married who's visiting from another camp that he kind of likes. So he gets to walk in with the piece that looks like he did something.
Huh.
The person who did the most usually is the man who has young children.
Interesting.
And that's what they'll tell you. Like, who's the best hunter? Well, this guy. Why? Well, he has 2 kids.
Yeah. Give him.
Of course, he's got to be the best hunter. They're all as good as they're all the same. Older men are better than younger men. Like the 22-year-old is not going to be as good as a 35-year-old because he doesn't have as much experience. But they're pretty similar.
Yeah.
In their qualities and abilities. And it's random beyond that. Okay. But the one who tries harder, does more work, is the one that has the kids and a larger family to feed. And if you don't have a large family, you're going to screw off. Like the 22-year-old guy isn't doing much. He gets stoned and watches everyone else go hunting. And but they want him they want this girl to like him.
Right.
So they help him out. But you know what? She knows that's happening.
Right.
She knows it's made up. But what's really the third level I think that's happening is everyone else doesn't think he's an asshole. And to her, that's what's important, right?
Right.
That's what's important. If he was a jerk, I've seen this. If the guy who's a jerk who screws off, nobody helps him.
Interesting.
He will walk in with nothing.
So
every time.
Even if she knows for a fact he wasn't the best hunter, he didn't actually earn that piece, she knows that by showing up with that piece, he's a likable, lovable guy that everyone wants to look good, which means he's a nice guy.
He's accepted by the other people in the group. And I've seen people that weren't accepted who are just jerks and who show up in a camp and hang out for a while. And the only way they bring anything to the camp is they happen to be good hunters. They get away with being a jerk because they're really good.
Because they do actually do the hunt and they're pretty good at it. That's funny.
But those folks usually end up having to move on. So what are the lessons here? Do we do anything like that here? I mean, first of all, the idea of, I'm going to say a second one right away because they're all kind of connected.
Okay.
The women, I think I might have mentioned this to you earlier. I can't remember. The women wear these amazing decorations on their faces and bodies, but it's mainly on their face. And it's a substance, Rothmanium is a genus, and it's a fruit that has a juice inside that's clear. And when you put it on your skin, it's like henna. It dyes the skin. Okay?
Even though it's clear?
It's clear, and then it changes the skin to a color. Yeah. And so what they do is they mix it with ash so they can see it going on.
Oh.
And then the ash kind of washes off or falls off, but this color stays there. And there's beautiful designs on their faces. They don't have mirrors.
Right.
They can't put the design on their own face. It must be done by their other woman. And men get involved in this too. Men have designs on their faces, and women and men put designs, but it's mostly among women. And they have to trust that other person.
Oh,
and
interesting.
A lot of these women are not sisters. They're women who've moved into to marry a man there because it's a patrilocal. So there may be women that have to build trust with each other. And this is a facility to do that, and just fun. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you think about these things, like that, we're talking about trust. We're talking about evaluation of someone's social role.
Right.
We're talking about getting food to everybody. The system, by the way, is found in hunter-gatherers around the world, around the tropics. It's called the distribution and the redistribution system, because the food is distributed ritually. The meat is distributed ritually to the hunters and the participants, and then it's redistributed to everybody. Okay, so it's like having capitalism followed immediately by communism.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right? Yeah, it's exactly like that. And by the way, and Marx knew about some of these things the hunter-gatherers are doing, by the way, but not this stuff. But anyway, the thing is, you can see the social mechanisms going on here. And by the way, it's very casual. Rituals in societies tend to be very, very casual. Yeah. When we depict them in movies, we see people being very uncasual.
Right.
But it's very casually done. But there are social mechanisms or behavioral cultural mechanisms that are designed to serve major social purposes of bonding, trust building, etc. Okay, but when we look at our own society, what do we see? For example, I mean, just things that we do.
Right.
I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Anthropologists study things, but they watch what you're doing.
Yeah.
You watch what people are doing and write it down. And you see people doing, you name it. You name the thing they're doing. Like you find, like the distribution, redistribution, so we name that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
When was the last time you were in the grocery store? Like recently, probably, right?
Right.
You're walking down the aisle in a cart. There's somebody down the aisle. The cart's on one side, they're on the other side looking at something. And you're walking towards them. They do not make eye contact with you, but they just casually happen to move out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Name that. You can name that, put it on a sheet of paper, and send students out to record it, and they can just put a check mark next to it. It's an absolutely ritualized behavior that we do, passive-aggressive cart avoidance or something, right?
That's funny. Yeah.
It's a thing we do, and you can name it and put a check mark next to it on a list of things you observe in a supermarket, right?
Right.
Do we do things that are like what the FA do with distribution or group behavior or something? People, whenever I say this, people say, oh, we don't do that anymore, but we do. We don't eat in restaurants alone.
True.
We don't go to movies alone.
True.
Why would you go to a movie with someone else? I mean, you're going to sit there quietly and watch a movie. Why are you there with someone else? But we do it.
Yeah.
And you know, there's all these things that we do that don't make sense as a thing you're doing. Like none of these things that the FAA described, like having two people butcher it, one person can do it.
Right.
Dividing the meat up, then you're just going to redistribute it later. That makes no sense.
Right.
But there's obviously there's something going on here. They're doing it for reasons. I gave you my interpretation of why they're doing it. And there may be, it's not all proven. There may be other reasons, but do they know what they're doing even? Like, do you know why you don't go to a movie alone?
No.
Did you ever think of it? Everyone ever think of it? Do you ever like discuss it? I'm going to a movie. Well, you know, our culture says you must not go alone.
Right.
Right. We don't discuss
or like
it.
People will look at you weird if you go by yourself.
Yeah. There are social mechanisms that we know are there. Like you see someone eating alone in a restaurant and you become sad for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For no reason. Like you don't know.
Right.
So we do recognize these. We kind of sense when things are right and wrong. Okay. The other thing though is like the decoration thing. Men or women may groom themselves in various ways in various cultures, but in our culture, meaning like in America, let's say, or North America, what do? Well, we don't do a thing because we have so many subsets of our subcultures and we're so mixed up and so diverse. I think the United States is maybe one of the most diverse countries in the world.
Right.
In its origins, and it's a big giant country with little pockets everywhere. So people are different everywhere.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a consistency in what we do. So it's very hard to spot these things. But we definitely have them.
Or maybe maybe that's a sign kind of how regionally you can tell where somebody's from, or if they're not from where you are locally, just based on how they're dressed or how they do their makeup or how they do their hair. Like when I lived in Chicago, you really never saw anybody with big teased blonde hair, you know, jewels on the back of their jeans. But down here in Tennessee, you see that all over the place. And you can recognize when somebody isn't local versus when they are.
Yeah, exactly. And so that makes it more complicated for us. But we also have things that tend to be pan-cultural, like the role of handshaking. Yeah. The gift giving stuff is kind of similar. So I guess one of the lessons here is, okay, what do we do that's similar, that's social bonding? And I think I just mentioned the couple of always going out to eat together. I had a weird, I don't go out much, but a friend of mine, this is kind of an interesting example. A friend of mine needed me to be in the same room with him for half an hour. Hi, Mike. It's Mike. He's probably watching. He'll be watching this because he was taking a test and I was proctoring it. Okay.
Interesting.
Now, how much did I have to do and give up in my life to sit there minding my own business while he's in my living room? Nothing. Right. But he really wanted to take me out to lunch for doing it. Yeah. He didn't have to. But I said, great. So we went to the nearest chicken wing place, and it was really weird because there were like 4 tables of people at that place. Every person who worked there was a woman, and everybody sitting at the tables was a man. Everybody. All these groups of men. I'm thinking, what are we doing here? Yeah. What's going on? Yeah. Yeah. And it was like 2 PM on a weekday. And I'd never been to this restaurant before, even though it was down the street from my house. It was a Buffalo Wild Wings.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was all just groups. So I have to go back to that place and see, is it always men in small groups?
It is.
Yeah, why?
And the servers are always women. Yeah.
So what's going on there? Now, if you were an anthropologist and you came across that, you'd go, oh, this is a master's thesis. I don't know what's going on here, but I have a student who might be able to nail this down with a couple of years of research.
Yeah, I can tell you what's going on.
What's going on?
Probably a game on TV.
Yeah, there was a game.
Yeah, I was going to say, a game on TV, probably. Yeah.
And not only that, but it was a hockey game, I think.
Yeah, yep.
But yeah.
Yep.
So, but women watch sports.
But usually not during the day, though.
Yeah, who does it during the day?
I think men, very exclusively, women watch sports during the day if it's a live game. Like I used to live by Wrigley Field, and women will go to a game during the day, but it's so rare that you see women turn on the TV and watch a game during the day. They usually catch up with like highlights later, like on YouTube or on whatever sports network. It's just rare that you ever see them watch it during the day.
Right. Now, those are important observations. Mm-hmm. And also, I think these men look to me like they work together. Yeah. Like they were supposed to be at work, and now they're at the game.
Lunch. Yep.
And so that brings in the whole nature of the patriarchy in relation to work environments. So there's a lot. There's definitely a master's thesis in there.
There is. You're right.
But how much of that do we observe of our own society? Another thing I thought, there's two other observations I'll make quick mention of. One of them is that all of the FA, they have a system, a really interesting system. A woman has a dream, and she'll tell people about the dream, the other women, and they help her. She feels it's important. Like she feels this dream is saying something to me. So she tells other women, and they help her understand what the dream is. And there might be a certain specific older women that are like the people you go to.
Right.
And they also do other magical stuff in medicine. Okay. And they're helping you interpret the dream. And as they work on the dream, they turn the dream into a song. And then that is added to the repertoire of songs that they do. They don't do a song and dance thing every night, but many, many nights they will, and sometimes during the day, there will be a singing and dancing thing. And the dance itself is extremely complicated and ritualized, and I can't explain much of it. But everybody is involved in the dancing. All the adults are involved in the dancing. It involves lots of people dancing, and then two people dance together briefly and go apart, and then two other people and go apart. It's extremely vigorous dancing.
Right.
And the singing is these songs that the women come up with. I remember I discovered this because other people knew about this, I think, but some people were singing and everyone was laughing at the song. And I said, "What's so funny about the song?" I said, these guys come up with the song. It's the stupidest song ever. And that's what makes this one stupid? What makes one good? And that's when I heard the whole story about the women make the songs, not the men. But this is a song made by some men, and it's stupid.
That's funny.
And they were just making, so they do this interpretation. But the point is, everybody can dance, everybody can sing. Everybody has an ability to do this polyphonic tonal music that they do, which is unique. You can get it on like international music places. The Pygmy music is unique, and they can all do it. And most people can also play an instrument. There's flutes and drums, and it's more men doing that than women. But everybody knows how to make them and use them.
That's cool.
Now, there will be one individual who's really good at making a flute, and there'll be another individual that really likes the drum. So there's individual variation, but they're all doing it all the time. It's not like in our society where some people do this, some people don't. Which is, again, that's like, it's a bonding ritual. It's whatever function it has is uniform across our society, and we have things that are broken up across our society. And I think a lot of what we do is a quest to unify those things.
Interesting.
We tend to lean in that direction. The other thing that I think is most startling, though, because it's so counterintuitive, is what happens at night. So at night, first of all, the sun goes down at 6 p.m., period. This is the equator, right? Just 6 o'clock is dark. 6:20 is dark.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change from day to day. It's not like long days and long nights like we have in the north.
They don't have daylight savings?
No, they don't have it. And by the way, the local time, which is Swahili time, which is done across much of East Africa as well, is that Samoya is 1 o'clock is 7 a.m. Noon is 6. 6 p.m. is 12. And then you start again overnight. So there's 12 hours in the day and 12 hours in the night, which makes sense.
Oh. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, this whole thing with 24 hours in the middle, that doesn't make any sense, what we do. So anyway, at night, you do not sleep 8 hours. You can't sleep 8 hours. First of all, it's cold. They're only warmed by fire.
Oh.
You can't light a fire in the middle of the night and have it go for 12 hours. You're always adjusting the fire, always adjusting the fire. Then they've got babies. They're not like in cribs. And when they get a little older, they start to crawl around, and you don't want them falling in the fire.
Right.
So you're always putting the baby back somewhere. Okay. And then there are all these disturbances that happen. They're just natural. Like something will start walking on you.
Huh.
You have to brush it off. If you're living in the bottom of the floor of the rainforest, right?
Right.
There's going to be something crawling or walking on you at some point. And then because they're not sleeping regularly, there's always somebody who just sits up and starts telling a story. If you listen, you hear people talking all the time or for hours every night. And if you listen more carefully and you record it maybe and ask people what's being said, you usually find out this is not two people talking to each other. This is two people just talking.
Just out loud?
Out loud, telling a story, their thoughts, talking to themselves out loud.
I relate to that.
Yeah, it's a normal human thing.
Yeah.
And it's like what we all do when we're alone.
Yeah.
But they're in a group, being alone. There's no 8-hour sleep. The FA and I've spoken with my colleagues who work with every other hunter-gatherer group in the tropics. Everybody does this. You sleep for an hour or two, you wake up, then you sleep again later. So everyone takes naps between a half an hour and 2 hours long, all day and all night. More naps at night, few naps during the day. That's how human beings sleep. If we take the tropical hunter-gatherers as us, unadulterated by technologically messed up culture, that's how we sleep.
Did you try and follow that pattern while you were there?
I didn't have any choice.
And did it work? I mean, did you feel any different?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's fine. You get used to it. It's fine. And the thing is that if you ask any sleep expert, and I have talked to sleep experts, I had a student when I was at the university who's actually helped found one of our local sleep. Minnesota has like the sleep center, like the global sleep center. One of the people who helped found it, and they just don't believe it. I could just say this all I want, and he goes, "No, that's not what happens."
Or like that's unhealthy. Yeah.
Our system is so based on 8 hours of sleep or whatever that people cannot accept the fact that is not what humans do.
Interesting. And how long, I meant to ask this, how long has the Pygmy culture existed? Do we know?
Well, okay, it's a really good question. Originally it was thought that it was the primordial human culture. Then some people came along with this, they wanted to just change everyone's mind, and they had the idea that the Pygmies could not survive in the forest, there's not enough food. So they moved in with agriculturalists later. Then I and another guy, Julian Mercado, did archaeology, and we showed that the archaeology shows that people go back as far as we can see archaeologically to before humans.
Interesting.
Before modern humans. So the archaeology just shows that the forest has always been occupied by somebody. And so whether they specifically do or not, it's hard to say. But the fact that there are pygmies in every area of Central African forests, West African forests have been completely denigrated and destroyed by people. But all these relatively untouched parts of the forest in Central Africa, everyone has a pygmy group living in it. And the things that I'm talking about are found as well among the Hadza, who went savanna honey keeping forest or foragers in upland woodlands in Tanzania, and the Kwasi people and other related Bushman people of South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and to some extent found in the Amazonian rainforests and Indonesian rainforest.
Do you think they all at some point came from the same place, or what they do just makes sense?
Only in the sense that humans all come from the same place.
Right.
But so human foragers spread around the world, and the tropical foragers all have extreme, like there are major differences. Like how much time a man spends with his child in two different pygmy groups was studied, and the difference was a ratio of like 2 to 1. Vast differences. There's the kind of tools they use. There's a lot of differences between forager groups. There's a lot of similarities too. And when we look at the similarities, they are distribution and redistribution system, the fact that they live in relatively small groups that move around a lot. But guess what? They're not nomadic at all. They're not nomadic at all. They have, any hunter-gatherer group we know of has 5 or 6 places that they always live. They just go back, they rotate.
Yeah.
Maybe there's 12 places they've ever lived, but there's 5 or 6 places they've spent 80% of their lives moving between. And they typically have a division of labor where men are way more oriented towards meat and women are way more interested towards plant products, with a lot of overlap. In the Pygmies especially, women are engaged in certain kinds of hunting more than most other groups. And they're using really different kinds of knowledge and skills. That's one reason why there's a distinction, because once you get a little difference, you find a bigger difference because of your specialization, what you need to know. They're different in how they marry out and in versus whether they're matrilocal. Most are patrilocal to some extent. There's a lot of differences, a lot of similarities, and the small groups, distribution, redistribution, male, female division of labor. We often find that through 3 issues back of Scientific American with Sarah Hrdy talking about how women hunt too, and that's true. But we have not overthrown the idea that men mainly hunt and women mainly gather. It's still true.
Right.
It's just not as simple and straightforward.
Right.
And it was discovered that it was not so simple in the early 60s by Lee and DeVore and others studying hunter-gatherers around Africa. They created a conference funded by Werner Gren, foundation created a conference. They called it Man the Hunter, the conference. And all the researchers showed up and said, you know what? Man the Hunter doesn't describe what's going on here. A really large amount of food comes from the women, maybe more than from the men, and less the women hunt. So it's not Man the Hunter.
Yeah.
That's the armchair archaeologist version of human evolution. Hunting drives human evolution. And it's a male thing, so women just kind of come along. That's the old-fashioned version before anyone ever went to the field. Then they all went to the field and found, no, if anything, women are driving evolutionary change for various reasons. And the men are coming along, but really it's both, and it's not Man the Hunter. So when Lee and DeVore finished editing the volume that had all this new perspective, they went to Werner Gren and said, okay, well, we can't call it Man the Hunter, the volume. And Werner Gren said, we have to. We've decided it's being called, we're publishing it, shut up and go away. So the Man the Hunter volume was published, and ever since then, every 6 to 8 years, some people comes along and said, it's not really Man the Hunter, like they said in that book. But if you read the book, it doesn't say that in the book. It's a title.
Right.
It's a title. So
I
can always tell
why they couldn't change the title. You think at least in new editions they would.
It was the old-fashioned. I know. Well, there was only one edition.
Oh, okay.
And it was just the old-fashioned archaeologists running the thing that were armchair archaeologists or anthropologists, and they should have changed it. So that's one of our problems in anthropology is every once in a while somebody realizes there's this thing called Man the Hunter, and then you can tell they haven't read the book.
Right.
Sarah Hrdy read the book. She should know better. But most of them haven't read the book, or it's just an editor or somebody trying to capitalize on a new view. The most female hunting group is the Agta of the Philippines, where women hunt with bows and arrows. And that's rare. That's really rare. Other groups, very few women ever hunt with bows and arrows.
Why do you think they do it differently?
I don't know.
I would imagine it might have something to do with some populations having higher percentages of women than men. So just like statistically, because more women are born, they just hunt more.
It could be, or it could be something a little bit different than that, but where if you have too limited number of people, more people have to do more things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point too. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's too distributed, or it could be a quirk. It could be not true. I mean, there's not a lot of research on these people.
One of them heard that there was a book called Man the Hunter. So they were like, you know what?
We're going to do this. Well, it's like Colin Turnbull wrote this book called The People of the Forest. And he says in that book, he did his research in the 50s, and he says there's no seasonality in the rainforest. Yet the Pygmies pretend there is, because they come and they get honey only a certain time of the year. And so they created seasonality in order to have some other things going. This is completely wrong. The availability of honey is extremely seasonal. It's like a 6-week period, and that's it.
Wow.
Maybe 8 weeks some years. It's extremely seasonal, and other things in the rainforest are extremely seasonal. And nobody knows why Colin Turnbull made up this lack of seasonality, because he was in the field.
Yeah.
Nobody knows why he made it up. But if you textbooks published before about 1990 all say that, because he had the only book, maybe 1985. He had the only book out, and people just learned it that way. And most of the stuff in Colin Turnbull's book about the Pygmies is just wrong.
Why would he do that?
Because there's one theory is he never went to the field. He was in the field, but he was actually living in the town a lot.
Oh.
And he had his own concepts of what I remember running into an anthropologist, a fellow graduate student when I first came, the first time I came back to the field. And the person said, so their cosmology is dome shaped, right? And I said, what? And they said, yeah, because they live in these dome shaped pups, so their cosmology is dome shaped. This guy had an idea of what the cosmology of the Pygmies was.
Interesting.
And I didn't know what their cosmology was. So when I went back, I asked about their cosmology. And it wasn't dome shaped. It was actually linear, which is really interesting to me because my research showed that their lifeways are linear in many other ways.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to you when last time we talked. They have these pathways they use for the forest.
Right. This was the part I thought was the most interesting.
Yeah. That's okay. So they have a series of camps that are habitually reused. They're located on a line.
Right.
And the other group that's not them will have the same thing, but really close. So you can actually, I mentioned before, you can actually hear the other group if they're making a lot of noise. But the group you're with will not go to that camp to visit. They have to go all the way back to the villages and out the trail again. Okay. We do that too.
And so they won't use each other's roadways, basically?
No, not legally.
That's
not legally. Sometimes you come across evidence of it and everybody gets upset. Someone's here stealing our honey, it looks like.
Oh, so if you use the road, but you don't do anything like that, that would be okay. But if you were to...
No, it's not okay.
Yeah. Interesting. Is it just a respect thing or is it a resources?
It's a resources territorial thing, I believe. Yeah.
Got it.
So when I got married, we got married in northern Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And my sister came to visit from California. And she's a smart person, knows how to travel. So she found an Alaska Air flight that went to North Dakota, rented a car. She got a short flight into a town in Minnesota, rented a car and drove over to where we were getting married.
Right.
25-mile drive.
Right.
This place where she landed was near where my then mother-in-law had a family. And they go to this family reunion every couple of years. And we got married near the cabin that they own.
Right.
Okay. And that's what I discovered. I discovered that my mother-in-law did not know that her ancestral home was a 25-minute drive.
Wow.
When they were going to the reunion, they would drive back to the cities 195 miles and then drive back out to the reunion. Not in one day, but they would always plan it that they would go back to this. Now, there's other reasons to go back to the city before you go to the reunion. So it didn't make zero sense. But the idea of driving directly there never occurred to anybody. It's a different environment. It's a savanna. It's the steppes, whatever we call it, the grasslands, as opposed to the forest.
Right.
And the roads in Minnesota, if you live in Minnesota, I can't tell you about the Carolinas. I don't know the geography there well enough. There's probably something similar. In Minnesota, you can go from right to left. You can go up Route 66, right, the Bob Dylan Road, Route 35, Route 169, Route 371, Route 71, or Route 10 from the Twin Cities to go out to some point in your cabin. So I knew somebody who had a cabin in Reamer, which is the Bigfoot Center, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And we had our cabin in Longville, 15-minute drive. And people were talking about, we should come visit your cabin sometime. But as though it was far away, because they came up 169 and we went up 371. So even though they were right near each other, they were linked to different highways. Of course, there's a road there. There's a road there connecting them. So we in Minnesota divide our space into these vertical up north-south, into 6 vertical north-south zones. And the route all along. You know where all of the Dairy Queens are and all the gas stations and everything else you need, the hardware stores. But you don't know anything about the next line over, even though it might be closer.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's true. I have road trips like that too, where I would rather take the slightly longer one where I know all the stops, I know all the safe gas stations, I know all the Starbucks,
Exactly.
Whereas the shorter one, I've just never done it before, so I'm not going to start today,
Right. I was driving somewhere with my son the other day, and they're like, "Why are you going this way?" It's like, we're going right over there. And I was like, "Well, I always go this way."
Yeah.
I'm not sure why, but for reasons you state, like when I drive around the Twin Cities, there are highways I prefer because I've lived near it here before.
Yeah.
Or I know this. I know when this highway gets stuck with something breaks on the highway, I can get off the road here and find my way.
Yeah.
and if I'm somewhere else, like, so there's a practical reason for it, all kinds of practical reasons for it, but that's something they do.
Yeah. And is there anything that you saw there that you thought, if only we did this in, North America? Or because it sounds like a lot of it is quite similar almost in the preferred pathway, the gift giving culture. Are there any things that they did that you either think we should bring here, or you recognize we don't do here for a reason? Like maybe you saw it not work out quite the way it should have.
Yeah, there's one example I think is really, a lot of this stuff is like you just said, like it's the comparison, we actually do things this way.
Quite linear, yeah.
Yeah. So one example would be one of the first things we encountered. I was out there with another anthropologist who was studying conflict, and so this is something he kind of worked out. But we went there, and the Americans that we were replacing were there, and we drove them back to the airport. So that's like a 2-day ride,
right?
And then came back by ourselves, and there was a woman as we were leaving. There was a woman who had a herniated navel that was infected.
Oh,
her herniated navel is a common condition there. Like 1 in 12 people have it, or not a herniated, but an extended navel. Like the navel's giant.
Yeah.
Right. And when they're older, it gets big. And if it gets cut with something, it's a direct route into their intestines.
Right.
Okay. Because their intestines are actually in that space. So she had an infected herniated navel, which apparently is a very dangerous thing. And it was a Pygmy woman. And we said, let's drive you to the hospital. And she said, no, I'll be fine. So we left her. I came back and she was dead. And she had just died. Actually, it was really interesting. We came back to our camp, to our research camp, and our guards were there that we hired the local guys to like stay in our camp while we're going. So anything going on, anything interesting happened? No. Anything going on like we were going at all? No. Everything was fine, like nothing interesting going on? No. So I guess I'll see you later. No, I got to go to the funeral. It's like, wait, there's a funeral? Yeah, the woman died. Well, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So when we say, is there interesting thing happened and someone died, that would be an answer that you'd say yes.
Yeah.
These are like our informants, right? It's like,
yeah,
be a better informant. Anyway, so we went over to the funeral, and people were really intense. People were the woman's son was keening by. They had built a special hut that looks like that's a funerary hut that's very distinct looking. You can see it from far away, and he's over there keening, and then suddenly a group of women show up who are coming from far away, and that included this woman's daughter. And she saw the hut, and she knows about where her mother usually sets her hut up in this camp. Remember, they reuse the camps? And she saw it was a funerary hut. So she immediately became extremely upset. Fell to the ground, and she was keening, hitting the ground. She went over, saw that her mother was dead. And then she went and got then she got a firebrand from a fire that was, there's always fires everywhere, right? And she went over to certain huts and lit them on fire. And the men were like putting the fires out, following her around, putting the fires out. She's lighting them on fire. She's putting them out. And finally, she kind of calms down. Only specific huts. And then everyone's still getting upset. And it turns out a number of things happened. For one thing, she had been having a dream about her mother's death because she knew her mother was sick. So they were busy. They were literally singing the "My Mother's Dead" song on their way into camp.
Yeah.
She was lighting the huts on fire. It was a larger than usual camp, and there were 2 patrolines represented in this camp. So the mother and the daughter and the son were the main group, and another group had married in, and just a few people had a couple huts from that group, and they're always separate. They're always far away. Like we talked about the marijuana smoking, right, before? Yeah. So they had this really long pipe that allows me to give you a toke when you're 6 feet away.
Yeah.
But not when you're 10 feet away.
Right.
So the people who are not related in the same patrol line have to be more than 20 feet away. And it was those huts she was lighting on fire. She was blaming her in-laws for the death of her mother.
Whoa. Okay.
Then the kind of weird thing happened.
Is that customary or is that acceptable?
Well, yeah. Okay. It's all about blame. They're finding blame. They're searching for blame. So she's searching for blame here. Okay.
Yeah.
That we learned there are no natural deaths. Every death is a homicide. Now, when you think about this, we think of it that way too. We always blame somebody or something for bad things, right?
Yeah.
So now, no one. It would obviously be magic. We're using magic. This homicide would have to be with magic, right?
Yeah.
So we learned that eventually. We learned that she was burning the huts of her relatives, of her in-laws, eventually, And while we're watching, this man comes over, his son actually comes over to us and says, this is kind of private. Normally, like, they're welcoming us into their lives all the time. We can observe whatever we want, pretty much.
Yeah.
But we're kind of upset here, and we're wondering if you could go away. So we said, okay. So we go off into the forest, but my colleague is like, I'm studying conflict. This is conflict.
Right.
I can't leave. So we're hiding in the forest. And then the son comes over again and says, do you think we can't see you? We said, okay, fine. So we just left. We also noticed that the men, okay, this is an important trait. The men had pulled out, at this point, they're all pointing arrows at each other. And the men had pulled out their arrows, they're pointing them at each other, the two patrilions. But there's a way to shoot an arrow, and the arrow has to be on a certain side of the bow, or it goes in a random direction.
Right.
They had all the arrows on the wrong side.
So kind of like a fake threat almost.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty real threat, but we're not actually going to shoot you, but we're not at that stage yet.
It's like pointing a gun at somebody.
Yeah, or threat, or like showing your gun but not pulling it out. Like, so anyway, eventually we were invited back. Then the next day, somebody came over and said, thanks for leaving us today. You can come back now. We're having the actual funeral today. So you're welcome to come. So we come to the funeral, and they've dug a hole. And this, as an archaeologist, I'm like, oh, I got to measure this and stuff. They dug a hole, and then at the bottom of the hole was another smaller hole. And eventually the body was put in that smaller hole, and that hole was then covered with wood sticks. And then the whole thing's buried, and everybody else put the dirt back in. Mm. And there's a guy who's trained as a Christian preacher who's not a Pygmy, who's like from the local village, who's giving a sermon, and everyone's kind of annoyed at that, but he's just doing that. But then the next few days involves this outside preacher adjudicating the blame problem. So that they're all giving their arguments as to who did it. And he's like letting them all talk. And then here's the lesson. Here's the lesson. The lesson is they figured out who did it and got over it. The person who did it is a person who is from that clan that they blamed, but a village that was several miles to the south. And as I investigated further, I found out there's no way they could know this village even exists.
Okay.
They blame people that don't even exist, and they got over it.
Interesting. So it's like the moment they can pin it on somebody else, even if that person's not even real, they never met him, they never seen him, but somebody is to blame, they can kind of heal and feel better.
Yeah, and then a further investigation, that's kind of what they normally do.
Yeah.
They're never going to blame somebody they know.
I was worried they were going to kill somebody who didn't do anything.
Right. They were worried too.
Yeah.
Right.
They're like, my feelings are telling me I need to blame somebody. Reality is telling me I know if I blame him, I'll hurt him. So I'm going to blame somebody inaccessible.
Right. And you can imagine, depending on your culture, there's a lot of ways you can do that. Yeah. I mean, you can blame the state, you can blame the government, you can blame a religious entity.
I mean, think about it. Like, how many times does something totally unrelated happen? Like, you have a bad experience at the grocery store, or McDonald's ice cream machine isn't working, or you didn't get the Amazon package when you wanted, and people are like, well, that's Bidenomics for you.
Right. Or I do some tutoring of kids in English, and one of the things you always got to do is, clarify the antecedent of your pronoun. Right. How many times do you hear the word them or they as a pronoun in a sentence when people are blaming something?
Right.
And like, who the heck are you talking about?
Yeah. Like, if they only let me, if they would only just, absolutely.
Right. So we have that all in our language. So that's one of the lessons, I think, is that they found a way. First, it's weird to me that they always, every death has to have an explanation.
Right.
That relates to something else vaguely interesting too. Daley and Wilson, the famous criminologist, and people I used to house sit for when I was in graduate school.
Oh, really?
They figured out they wanted to study crime, and they realized they could only study homicide because every other crime, the statistics are all completely useless. Nobody tries that hard. Somebody does something. We have a crime wave going on right now in my neighborhood. We have all these thefts, car thefts, but they're not really car thefts. But there is 10-year-olds with a USB stick who saw this TikTok video that tells you how to steal a Kia.
Yes.
And then they drive it down the street. That's not really car theft, right? But we had this big, and you know what percentage of the cars that are stolen lead to a prosecution or a referral to the prosecutor? 5%.
Yeah.
I think it's less than 5% in this case. But if there's a homicide, you figure out the homicide.
Yeah, you figure that out. Yeah.
Right. Or if you're arrested for some kind of theft, you're going to get charged with something else. You're going to drop the charges, add that. What you actually get officially charged with and convicted of is very rarely what you did.
Right.
Unless it's a homicide.
Right.
Right. So the homicide data are good. And that's obviously, we consider that really important. Why do we consider homicide so important? Because we are one of the few species that we can do homicide so easily.
Right.
As soon as we invented the bow and arrow or the throwing spear or any other weapon, I can kill you and you can't stop me.
Right.
You can't stop me. But society can stop me.
Right.
Our culture can stop me. Our practices can stop me.
Right.
So
or
that's
karma or payback. Yeah.
Right. So the fact that you all, in this particular society, in our society, we have a system by which we always trace down as homicide. And when a body is found with no homicide or no known reason, that a little case of a body being found in some little town will be on the national news sometime. Not only the lead story, but it'll be in the New York Times somewhere in the extra section of extra news stories.
Yeah.
But a heart theft not solved will not be.
Right.
And, we always focus on it. And their method is to always know it was every death. Like, how much trouble do we go to when someone dies? We have, and depending on the state, there's like at least 2 distinct determinations are made by an official coroner: cause of death, manner of death. It's a very official thing.
Right.
In their society, every death is a homicide. And since no one ever kills anyone, because they have a very low homicide rate, by the way, they're not violent people.
Well, according to them, they have 100% homicide rate.
According to them, it's 100%. But they're not violent people, so it's always magic. And it turns out, I've seen other cases. Our person who worked in our camp came to me. She was seeing a guy, and she said, I have to stop going out with him. Why? Well, I found this under my mattress. And it's a leaf. I was like, what does that mean? Well, this is the leaf that someone puts under your mattress when they want your boyfriend to die. Who put it there? I think it was a distant cousin from this village way to the south. It was her mother.
It's like, girl, just break up with him. You don't need a reason.
Right.
if you're not feeling it.
Well, it could have been her, but I don't think it was her. I think it was her mother. My belief was that it was her mother that did it. But you could do that yourself.
Yeah.
You could do it yourself.
Oh no, it is the warning leaf. Looks like we can't go out anymore. Sorry.
Right. Exactly. So magic is just used as the framework for anything you need it for. But the idea of finding a cause is built in. We do it no matter what.
Right.
But having a cultural mechanism to allow you to find a cause in a way that no one gets hurt after that.
Right.
And you move on. That's what they do.
Interesting.
And instead of doing that, what do we do instead? We have conspiracy cults.
Yeah, totally.
Which is not a good solution.
That's like the larger version of what they're doing. The cousins in the other village.
Right.
But except with us, it's groups and clubs and mysteries and government theories.
Right. And their method allows you to forget about the them.
Yeah.
Whereas our method is the them is right there in your face all the time. So I think that's something we can learn. That's something we do that's similar, but they do it in a better way than we do.
It's like the difference is both of us are trying to find somebody to blame. They're trying to find somebody to blame in a way that nobody gets hurt. We hurt innocent people finding somebody to blame.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That's our cultural dysfunction.
Interesting.
Just briefly, the other thing that they do, which is found around the world, is cross nursing.
What's that?
More than one woman nurses a child.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so one of the more tragic things we had was I was out with this group of people, and the baby was really sick. The baby would not stop crying. And they actually cured the baby from crying by doing traditional magic. It seemed to work. They did the thing they call it chanja, but you see sometimes people with a scarification, little tiny dots like along their eyebrows. It's an African thing, traditional African thing. They did that to the baby. They chanjed the baby's stomach. They put, I think it was 114 little kind of cuts in the stomach of the baby. And the baby stopped crying. Who knows why? Maybe the baby was ready to stop crying, or maybe the stress of being poked at by 100 cut. I can't explain it. But the reason the baby was crying was because the mother's milk was bad, and the mother had mastitis. So about 2 days later, she died.
Oh, that's so sad.
And then the woman's sister, because they do have love-right marriage to some extent. So if a parent dies, there may be a marriage between the siblings.
Interesting.
Maybe not. It's not required. But the baby will then go into the other person, the living person's family. so that you find a place for the baby right away.
Right.
And they said this baby will not know who his mother is. This baby,
Right.
my wife will now be this baby's mother, whatever it was. That there's no adoption. There's just like, this is now your mother.
It's more like absorption. You just kind of absorb them into your family.
Yeah, this is a good way of putting it. But meanwhile, that woman was already nursing the baby.
Right.
Because they do cross nursing. So older women often nurse babies where they haven't had a baby in a long time. They continue to nurse, and or just women that are, just nurse each other's babies. So you can do something while someone else is nursing your kid and whatever. And that's actually a really common thing around the world. It's been ritualized or formalized or commercialized in 18th century Europe. It was actually Sarah Hurdy who wrote a paper about this. How many babies in Paris, there's actually mass graves, and many, many babies not accounted for, because what would happen is the wealthy women would have a baby, and then there would be a nursemaid and nursemaid services. So they would we'll take care of your baby. And a lot of those babies just disappeared. It's sort of like a bad contractor, right?
Yeah.
Like you think they're putting a roof on, but they never put the tar paper underneath. Well, in this case, you think they're nursing your baby, but they just actually threw the baby in the mass grave and disappeared. But you paid them. So there's this, but then you're not so upset because it's a society without safe abortion and no birth control.
Right.
So the women are getting rid of their babies.
Yeah.
And paying for it. But the underlying that is just a common pattern that they have a nursemaid. Nursemaids were just common in the 18th century France. So we do that in some societies, but in modern Western society, we don't think of cross nursing.
Is there would there be a medical benefit to that, or an economical benefit to that?
Okay. Something like 1 in some number. And the data on this are terrible. And there are people who will tell you it's not true at all, but some number that's not very big, like 1 in 12 women or 1 in 20 women or something like that, really do not effectively nurse a baby. And the baby needs those are people who often go right away into formula.
Right.
So, and that's just what we do in our society. We just go to the bottle right away. But if you don't have bottles, the nipple was invented around 1900, the latex nipple. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And, the birth control, latex, it's all about latex. Latex gives you condoms and nipples.
Right.
And that's almost as important as getting the vote for women in North America.
Right. Yeah.
It's significant. But before that, if you couldn't nurse your baby, someone else had to nurse your baby.
Interesting. And nowadays I've definitely seen on Facebook where people exchange breast milk, which I thought was odd until I grew up and I learned more about it. And I was like, oh, that's actually really handy. That's interesting. I didn't know you could just share like that.
Yeah. So that depends on whether you like formula or like breast milk. And
yeah. Right. And I didn't realize also that it could, I guess, I don't know if maybe I thought babies could only use genetically similar milk. I don't know what I thought, but it makes sense to me now that they could drink from anybody, that they could get their supply from anybody. Interesting. And so is there anything that you miss about living with the Pygmies? Did you have a pretty good time?
Yeah, I did have a good time. I miss everything about it. Because I was over about 3 years. I was there for 8 months each year. I mean, it's just I was living there more than not. And the thing is, this is me bragging a little bit, but almost every researcher that went there had the idea of working with the Pygmies because they're the cool group.
Yeah.
And almost everyone ended up working with the villagers.
Yeah.
Because you go out with the Pygmies and in 3 or 4 days, you're sleeping in mud. It's getting, their huts are not waterproof. People might, they're perfectly, no, they're not. They leak. It rains every day. It's miserable. I grew up camping a lot of my youth.
Yeah.
In really primitive camping conditions. So none of it bothered me at all. And so I never had the period, you need to do this for 3 weeks to get used to it.
Yeah.
I didn't need to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was easy for me. And so I was one of the few people actually spent that much time with them. And it's just so comfortable and so interesting. And the thing about a rainforest is something new and interesting happens every single day. Usually it's something stinging you that's new and interesting you hadn't seen before, we found a new kind of poison, a
new
caterpillar.
Interesting way to die.
Right. Yeah. And then of course, in learning the culture, I mean, I never mastered their language. They have a really complicated, hard to learn language, almost no one outside has mastered it. But Well, we had a good common language in the version of Swahili we spoke. But you just see things that are just different that every single day.
Yeah.
And their sense of humor is special. And you're always learning something new every day. And it's like going camping and just not coming back.
Interesting.
And so I enjoyed and then when we're in the villages are also fun to be in. A little bit more edgy because in the village, people are always coming by and wanting to get something out of you. And then there's the occasional nasty soldier who comes through. I also spent time in another part of the Congo, what is now the Congo, in a park doing paleontological archaeology. And between the various areas I worked, we were kidnapped once. I had members of my crew kidnapped 2 times.
What?
I was put in front of a firing squad 1 time. I had really multiple close calls with hippopotamuses, mostly.
I've heard those were violent, actually.
Yeah.
I've heard those.
Well, every day in one place we worked, there was a place you'd go to bathe in the lake, and there was a hippo there.
Yeah.
And you just basically, how upset will the hippo be, and how fast can you run?
Right.
And you have to calibrate your running speed with the hippo, because they're not slowed down by being in water. Like if the water is like 3.5 feet deep, hey, try running through that water.
Right.
Hippo is no problem. So
like,
and they go 30 miles. So it's all calibrated. And so, and hyenas, I mean, I've had a hyena take my hat off my head while I was sleeping. I mean, you have all kinds of interesting encounters with animals, and those are almost always they're always worth it and fun, except they're really close calls.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the soldiers and all the people are amazingly gracious, wonderful, welcoming people.
Yeah.
And then there's these soldiers.
Yeah. And you survived a firing squad?
Yeah. There was a group of soldiers that had been poaching, and we reported it to the park and everything. And then they came through again. I was on my boat. This is an interesting story. You know the African Queen, the movie with Katharine Hepburn?
Yeah.
And Humphrey Bogart. That boat, that was filmed here. And that boat, I believe, is the same boat or an identical model that's been stripped down and just wood planks put on top of it. And it's a little ferry that brings you back and forth across this river.
Yeah.
So I was in my own boat, a Zodiac, going across the river, and this truck was on the boat, and I identified the truck as one that the poachers are soldiers, same thing. Poacher equals soldier. That they were crossing over. So I sped around and got up and ran up the hill and gone up to the place where you enter the park. And I said to the park chief, those poachers are back. They're about to get off the ferry and come up the road.
Yeah.
So they said, well, we can't let them in the park.
Yeah.
So they came up and I said to them, you can't come in the park. And they said, we're going in the park. We had a little argument. And finally, the head soldier he said stuff to their guys in Lingala, which is a language I don't know that well. And they all came out and they all pointed their guns at me at the same time. One of the guns was a grenade launcher, which is funny.
Whoa.
And the rest were like Kalashnikovs. They're called Belgians. It's like an automatic rifle. And one guy had a pistol. And he goes, ready, aim. And then I said, okay, you can go in the park now.
That's funny.
And I opened the gate for them and they drove in. It's like, you can go now.
Was the park person okay? Like the person in charge of the park, the person you spoke to, like, did you ever see them again?
Oh, he was a local chief. Like I saw him again many times.
Okay, good.
But he couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
what are you gonna do?
The park guards have a rifle.
Yeah.
But they have each 1 bullet.
Wow.
And if they lose a bullet, then they have 0 bullets.
Why do they only have 1?
Because they're expensive. They don't want them actually shooting anything. If you give a park guard a bunch of bullets, they will become a poacher.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So they only want to have, and they begrudgingly let them have 1 bullet.
Interesting.
And which they're going to mainly use to like signal that they're in trouble or something like that. They're not going to shoot anybody.
Well, and I almost feel like that's something to learn, is like all it takes is 2 bullets to take you from being a guard to a poacher. There's like a symbolism there. All it takes is 2 bullets instead of 1. Yeah. Interesting.
That's a good point.
Fascinating. Yeah. Just absolutely fascinating.
So yeah, there were times that were, the other thing I learned about myself is that when this whole thing was happening with those soldiers, I wasn't afraid for even 1 second.
That's good.
But later, I felt really freaked out.
Yeah, later you're like, that was so close.
There were times when I had really close encounters with lions and really close encounters with hippos that I was completely calm and unafraid the entire time. And then later I felt, but I guess I was saying how upset I would be or how scared I would be had no relationship to the actual danger level or the actual thing happening.
Yeah.
I had no calibration.
Yeah.
As a person. And I don't think that's unusual.
Yeah. Do you think that's like a survival response?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. It's like, I remember this conversation recorded in one of those old texts I think it was recorded by Stanley, the horrible guy that went, by the way, this is where Stanley was too. And one of his, Henry Morton Stanley, the guy who explored the Congo for the Belgians to set up the Belgian state. And he had the death camps and everything.
Yeah.
People still talk about him there.
Wow.
Like, people say if a relative of Stanley comes here, we will murder him.
Wow.
Because he had the death camps. But he talks about Livingston being almost eaten by a lion and being totally calm the whole time as a way of being, it's a natural mechanism to, survival mechanism. But yeah, I learned about myself that I did not have any kind of calibration between what the actual danger and what was the real danger and how I felt at the time and then how I felt later. And I think that's probably the kind of thing, like if you are in a business, if you have a job where you are in danger, like you're a police officer or like a Navy SEAL or something, I assume a lot of the training is about that.
Right.
Yeah, it's got to be about,
Well, I feel like even just normal human beings, like I was hit by a drunk driver last week.
Wow. And are you okay?
But I didn't get scared about it until like a day later. Like
I
was like cause it was a whole ordeal. Like I was totally fine, but like it was an entire ordeal. It was really scary. It took hours and hours and hours to handle. But like a day or two later is when the kind of inertia hit me. And I was like, I was scared later. And I almost wonder if that's a survival tactic or if that's something where maybe adrenaline is taking care of you in a way that's different than you would think.
Yeah, I think it's the stress hormones, the adrenaline and the cortisol and so on that's doing that. Yeah, the closest call I ever had while doing this research was actually in Scotland.
Interesting.
Because I was on my way back one year and in Nairobi, I got into Nairobi, which is really hard to get to from there. But like going in and out takes days and days and days and days to get in or out. Okay. I was in Nairobi. And I was on the phone in a hotel, on a phone with a travel agent. In those days, you use travel agents, and you can't own it. You can't have a return trip ticket when you're going for a year to someplace. They won't give you one, right? So I'm trying to get my ticket out, talking to a travel agent, and I've got a flight to Europe, and then to Frankfurt, and they said we can fly you from Frankfurt from Nairobi to Frankfurt to New York on Tuesday or on Thursday. So I'm thinking, well, people pay extra to go to Nairobi. I want to stay here till Thursday. So I said Thursday. And I hear the keyboard going. And then I thought, I've been to Nairobi like 6 times. It's boring here. I'm going to go back on Tuesday. So I said, excuse me, can I make that Tuesday instead? So she changed it to Tuesday. So I get on eventually on an airplane and fly to Frankfurt. And then I get the airplane that goes to New York. I'm in New York staying with some friends. And 2 days later, the same flight with the same flight crew, that's the one that blew up over Lockerbie.
Wow.
Pan Am 103. It was that plane that I had a ticket on Thursday, and I just randomly changed. So that was my closest call.
Wow.
And with that, like I thought it was a horrible thing to happen, but I didn't connect it to myself. And then like a long time later, like years later, I realized, wait a minute. And I said, is that really true that happened? And I saved all my air flight stuff because it's tax stuff, right? So I went and looked, and sure enough, I had the ticket, Pan Am 103, that Tuesday. I had the stuff from the boarding pass. It really happened. I mean, I knew it happened, but I thought it was so weird. Did it really happen? I went and checked, and it really did happen.
Wow. It's interesting that the scariest thing that happened to you was actually something that didn't happen to you.
Didn't happen at all.
It almost happened. Yeah.
If I had just made a slightly different decision.
Wow. That's wild.
Of course, that happens to hundreds of people. Like every time an airplane crashes, there's going to be a lot of people that weren't on that plane that's
true.
That could have, or they just didn't, and so on. And
that's true. I feel like we heard a lot of those on 9/11. People who had had to change their flights or overslept or missed it for whatever reason.
Yeah, or didn't go to the building that day.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, the part of the Pentagon that was hit, I was talking to someone the other day who worked at the Pentagon, and her office was right there in that spot. at some time, but they had evacuated the entire wing weeks or months earlier because they're rebuilding it.
Yeah.
So everybody had to move out. And there's all these people it's a big building, all these hundreds and hundreds of people that weren't hit by that plane because it was under construction or something.
Wow.
They moved them all out.
Wow. I feel like there's like an entire podcast episode I could do on chance and like chance encounters and happenings and things like that. But
the near misses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Dr. Laden, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I want to be
really enjoyed
respectful of your time. This is very interesting. I feel like there's an important lesson I always feel like we can learn from simpler cultures, because I feel like they're actually not much simpler at all. They're just different.
Well, that's a good point. And I want to just point out something about that. What do you need to know to have lunch? You need to know how to open a refrigerator.
Yeah.
How to open a microwave and what button to press on the microwave.
Yeah.
And you might have a more elaborate lunch.
Yeah.
But that's really all you need to know.
Mm.
What do you need to know to have lunch if you're a pygmy? Well, first you have to have all these social relationships I've been talking about that link you to other people. You're only going to get some of the food because you're of one gender. The other gender is going to get some other food. You got to have good relationships with everybody else. Then somebody has to make a bow or a digging stick and an arrow or a carrying case.
Somebody's got to have a dog.
Somebody's got to have a dog. You have to have a way of smelting metal so you can make an arrow tip, or the knife. The women use a special knife called an apapau for like processing stuff. Then you have to know that these roots, which are your main form of food, are all deadly poisonous unless you cook them a certain way.
Yes.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, the pygmies do not have a way of making fire. They have to carry their fire with them all the time. So you got to have somebody doing that. And there's all these things you have to do just for lunch.
Yeah.
And everybody in our society, there's all these complicated things lead to your lunch.
Yeah.
Like there are farmers and stuff, but everybody has to know like 5 things.
Yeah.
And they're different things than everyone else knows, as opposed to what the pygmies have to know. They have to know everything. And even though the men and women do differentiate their behaviors, they can do each other's jobs mostly.
Right.
They all know. So it's actually incredibly complicated.
Right.
Where for us, it's like, where's my clicker?
Right. Yeah. And I always think that's interesting that we always view those types of cultures as like simpler, and everybody talks about like, oh, going out and living on a farm, like simpler times.
Right.
Those were hard times.
Yeah, try actually living on a farm.
Right. Those are like, I'm from Arkansas. Those are hard times. Those are not fun times. I can go to my fridge and get butter that I did not have to churn. These are easy times.
and the cow that got mastitis and you had to put it down and get another cow.
Right.
And then, right.
When nowadays you can just go on TikTok and watch videos of veterinarians like saving farm animals' lives, in an instant with machinery. But yeah, I just thought this was really interesting. It really stood out to me last time I talked to you, and I'm glad I got a chance to talk to you a little bit more about this because I
always enjoy talking to you anytime.
Yeah. And so anybody who's listening, if you're listening on audio platforms, you can send an email, or if you're watching on the visual platform, you can write in the comments if you have any questions for Dr. Laden, or if you have any comments or thoughts or anything you would just like for him to know or tell him about. Comment or email, let me know. I'll send everything to him, and we'd love to hear from you.
you